Morning, everybody. How we doing? We're working on a DSM compilation video here, as well as some of the other things that Verve innovated, or sometimes, in some cases, followed. Jazz is a small universe in some ways, and by the 50s, that universe had shrunk a lot, and it was still at some point driving graphic design. Jazz was very much at the forefront of. I mean, there's no rock and roll at this point. Polka covers were never going to be that great, innovative new art form. A lot of the new genres of styles of music, rock and roll, R&B, are very much in their nucleus. Classical records had different looks. The 78 era didn't have much album art at all. It was the dawn of the 10-inch era where the album art form really takes a leap forward. Although, to be fair, a lot of these early DSM JTP covers were on 78 booklets. And those 78 booklets would often have real album artwork as well. But it was really the 10-inch era where it starts with Burt Goldblatt and DSM, and then as we move towards the LP era in the mid-50s, the whole thing explodes. And of course, Reid Miles at Blue Note has a big influence and even changes the direction of things here at Verve, which I'm going to show you. So we're going to jump into it right now and look at some of the things that Verve, Clef, Norgran, DSM did. Okay, jumping right into it, we're looking here at some of the early DSM covers for JTP. You got, great Lester Young, some Buddy DeFranco there. These covers are stylized in the thin lines with the blocks and the way the colors are orchestrated. It's just a really cool, compelling, modern yet classical kind of look. DSM really had David Stone Martin, for those who don't know. He comes into the fore with Norman Granz at the Stinson Ash disc label, which is a label that was in Indiana that was issuing early Jazz at the Philharmonic 78s. DSM was doing the covers for those. He was also doing some covers for some of the other Ash releases, for like a Coleman Hawkins release, which was a cool cover. A lot of these covers are just fantastic. They capture that kind of cafe, boutique feel. A lot of them feel like they're Parisian street affairs. I love a lot of the lines and the way he uses color. And you'll see different styles from him. Some of it is very much this line drawing with some of the, there's a watercolor era. There's definitely different style. I love that Stan Getz cover. He was certainly a very innovative artist with a great sense of movement and a great sense of capturing the swing and the feel. And he's really good at the portrait aspect as well. He really captures people's expressions, and the Oscar Peterson's kind of a classic, the Billie Holiday at the Philharmonic. That's the one 10-inch I don't have. Cool Ben Webster cover. There's a lot of stuff here that we're going to dive into with DSM, because there's hundreds of DSM covers. The great Bill Harris, great bone player, and some of this stuff's going to be LP, some is going to be 10-inch. The Toshiko Akiyoshi 10-inch, which you just saw, I actually finally won that the other day, so that's in the mail, and that's the last, from what I know, Verve, Clef, Norgran piece of music that I don't have. There's a few covers that are different between 10 inches and LPs that I don't have, but I have all the music that I've researched that the labels put out, which is a pretty impressive body of work, as I've said. That Slim Gaillard cover is great. The jam session covers are fantastic. Again, they capture the emotion, they capture the movement, they capture the facial expressions. The Parker cover, the Artie Shaw cover, it's just great stuff. Again, that streetscape feels like it could be in Brussels or Zurich or Prague. They're just fun. I love that Harry Carney cover. One of my favorite, honestly. The great baritone saxophonist. I got that record from Denmark. It's a hard record to find. The jam session covers have several variations. There's jam session number 5, great cover there. There's 6. Okay, so moving on again here with the Bob Brookmeyer. That's actually the 7-inch of what was an LP with the same cover that actually got the modern version on Clef and then was reissued again on Verve. There's a lot of duplicity here with a lot of the stuff, yet in spite of that, the body of work is still immense. It's an incredible, I love that cover, incredible documentation, another great cover. It's incredible documentation of the greatest jazz players the world has ever seen, all in one place at the same time. Great Anita O'Day. The Dixieland, some of that Down Home series stuff has some really cool covers. Yancey's Last Ride. They kind of capture that brothel, New Orleans. He kind of reiterates that cover in the JATP. Some fantastic Roy Eldridge right there. I love that Al Hurt cover. Again, got a real New Orleans feel. Cat House Piano. I mean, he's really capturing that New Orleans bordello kind of aspect. The Ralph Burns here and that one before it, I think are the last two DSM covers that he does. And it's kind of surprising how, as we move into the LP Verve era, how many DSM covers get replaced. And they get replaced often with more modern, contemporary looking things a mere short 2-3 years later. That's how fast graphic design changed and moved and adapted to what was happening elsewhere. So even a major label like Verve is feeling the impact of what Reid Miles is doing at Blue Note. The covers that are happening at Prestige, at Riverside. I mean, a lot of those labels are kind of copying what Blue Note is doing as well. And so this classic DSM artwork, it's actually a fairly short-lived era. And the same goes for Burt Goldblatt. Goldblatt shows up 5152 doing, all the stuff for all the various labels he worked for, which it is a much broader label spectrum for Goldblatt versus DSM. DSM kind of starts with Ash and Stinson and then goes to works with Norman Granz. And by the time Verve launches, he's kind of done with David Stone Martin. There's a few covers, like a Billie Holiday cover that comes in with the Verve, but very few Verve titles get new DSM covers. If they have a DSM cover, it's almost always a Norgran or a Clef cover that they reissued. But I would guess 80% of those early Clef Norgran DSM covers got replaced with new, more modern covers, which on some level is a little bit disappointing. So my friend Jean-Michel says that a lot of the musicians weren't crazy about the fact that DSM covers were replaced with different, more modern covers. And at first I thought, okay, it must have been MGM when they bought the label in 5960 that instigates all these new covers. But when you look at the actual timelines, Norman Granz is still in charge when Verve launches in 57, 56. And so most of those cover changes, Norman Granz had to okay that. He was very hands-on, and there's no way that some art director decides to change all those covers without his okay. There's a lot of other art people in the art department at Verve, Norgran, Clef, and I'm going to get into some of those titles as we move forward here a little bit. But we're still going through a lot of great DSM covers. This is more of the LP era here now. There's going to be some 10-inch stuff, repackages, LPs. A lot of this Jack Cat stuff that's earlier LP stuff. And then we're going to look at the photograph stuff next, because that was being interspersed by guys like Herman Leonard and Phil. Oh, I have to look at my sheet. I'll look at it. I love that slide trombone record. The great Oscar Peterson covers are just fantastic. And I mean, that's something they did a lot as well, was use the same image, but put a different color plate behind it to kind of give it distinction from other variations of that series. The Oscar Peterson being a great example, the Art Tatum stuff. A lot of albums had the same cover reissued on the 7-inch EPs and 45s, but they would change the color background there as well. So you look like, oh, I don't have that, but it's actually the same artwork. It's just got a different color backplate. And so there's some of the Tatum stuff. It is an incredible body of work that DSM churns out. And some of them feel more effort put in than others. Some feel a little bit more, here's the great series of Tatum covers. And I really do like David Stone Martin's work, obviously. I've collected, like I said, most of it. And there's flyers and promotional stuff from that era that he did the artwork for as well, that it's really hard to get a complete collection of the David Stone Martin body of work. And he does do stuff for a few other small labels as well early on. And then he ends up coming back in like the 70s working with Progressive, if I remember. Is it the Progressive label? I think it is. Where he does some covers for some of those great classic traditional jazz records that they were putting out at that era. I love that alto sax cover. tenor sax. These are kind of compilations on Norgran, the guitar one, Oscar Moore, Barney Kessel, and Tal Farlow, the pretty famous jazz West Coast cover. And here we're getting to some of more of the watercolor. Maybe some of this is what's it called? Not the crayons, but the more wet pastels, maybe. But again, the great Teddy Wilson cover. Again, you're seeing some kind of what looks like watercolor work to me. I love the Benny Carter work right there. It's interesting stuff, man. There's an Eldridge 7-inch, which again is a copy of the 10-inch artwork, which had a different color background. The great Hank Jones cover. That Afro cover is one of the most different covers, along with this Journey into Love cover for the drummer, Louis Bellson. Those are very different covers. Again, here's that watercolor look, where it's just kind of throwing watercolor with some of the pencils under the background, the Hampton classic stuff. Gene Krupa. I tried to group some of the stuff together that was thematically linked. And so I feel like this is a whole series. So I want to get a better copy of that eventually. I love that Artie Shaw cover. That's fantastic. The Hampton record's a pretty famous cover. It's a pretty impressive. Okay, so jumping right now in with the photos here. There's a lot of cool photography being done here as well. And people often talk about Frank Wolf's work at Blue Note, of course, which Reid Miles often used elements of. But without question, the photographic work of people like DSM is also of note. There's a great Nino Day 7-inch, Johnny Hodges, which I don't have yet, Oscar Peterson. A lot of these early black and white covers to me are quite evocative and express the time and the era. The Stan Getz is fantastic. The great Jack Cat, 10-inch right there. Louis Bellson, who was a fantastic drummer and one of the innovators of the double bass drum. Bellson was one of those guys who really churned that stuff out. And of course it became a staple of hard rock years later with the Ginger Bakers and the whole heavy metal scene had double kick drums for a long time. The great Flip Phillips, Mr. Krupa. I think there's two copies of that Krupa, one with the red print, which is obviously a second pressing. Color added to these black and whites in any format is almost always a second edition, kind of like Savoy, where they'll sometimes slip a little cover into a second pressing, and then the Savoy actually changed all those covers again as well. But it's just testament to how fast graphic design was changing. Whether it's Savoy, whether it's Verve Clef, I mean, what was hip and what was cool, what was happening, changed so fast that by the time 56, 57 comes along, DSM and Bert Goldblatt were no longer in demand. It was no longer a hip modern look. And yet, they've both risen to high esteem in posterity. We look at what DSM and Goldblatt accomplished and just really relish their gorgeous covers and how they do capture the time and the era and the music. It's great Jack Cat cover again, a nice Louis Bellson cover. The Kenny Drew is fantastic. More great Oscar. I mean, it's just crazy to see all these great faces. That's a cool Chubby Jackson, Bill Harris 7-inch right there. More George Wallington actually. Wallington and Bellson look a little bit alike. The 6 was a great little combo that has some work at Bethlehem as well. The great Charlie Ventura, who Philadelphian with a lot of spunk and modernity. Slim Gaillard. There's a great Stan Getz cover with his youngin' by the looks of it. Again, the Hampton. If the cover print means it's probably a second edition. The great Little Jazz Roy Eldridge. Now we're starting to get into more color edition photographs, which are going to be a little bit later. 56, probably into 57. But still great photos. There's the Jazz Scene cover. Cool picture. I just got that 10-inch as well. That was a photo of a screenshot. Vibasi again with some color in there. So we're starting to see some color in some of these. The Charlie Barnett with the color background, which you saw a lot of Blue Note and some of the labels where you have the color background or the black and white photo. I mean, it's a cool selection of photos. Waiting for that record to show from Italy still. The Al Hibbler, Jazz Recital, Ralph Burns and Billie Holiday. That's an LP, came out a little later. Again, you're trying to see a little bit more color stuff towards the end of this montage. Great Jack Cat, great Flip Phillips. So a little bit of colors being added in here now as we start to move into the middle 50s. Cool down home Ralph Sutton photo. A nice 10-inch there with a color background plate. The Bob Scobie down home record, which again was a Verve subsidiary. The Hamp had the color background. So it's a cool you see how it's not just DSM. And DSM was a big part, but there's a lot of other artists having impact and doing things at Verve and Clef and Norgran that, I mean, they all are kind of legendary in their own way. So we're going to start moving to a bit more of a modern era here with the Billy Bauer, the great Flip Phillips, Buddy Rich trio, the Buddy DeFranco. These are starting to have the impact of the block templates and some of what Reid Miles was doing. Again, more colors being added, the way those blocks of color. I mean, you can see Reid Miles' influence on these later covers. The Buddy Rich, again, a screenshot. The Roger King Motion, which I'm not sure who did that cover. Some of these are other artists. You have a Merle Shore, who was an art director and was responsible for a lot of the graphic work. Again, how Blue Note is that looking? How Blue Note is that looking? You have a guy by the name of Phil Stern, who was doing a lot of these covers in photography. Phil March, who did a lot of stuff as well, 2 different Phils. A guy by the name of Ken Whitmore was doing some of the photography. A Ralph Kramer, or Ralph, I didn't spell that very well. There's a Chuck Stewart, a Herman Leonard, and these are all names that were doing a lot of cool things and replicating what was happening and kind of almost forcing DSM out of the picture. You can see how much the influence of what was happening around jazz is trickling into a lot of these looks. That's how Blue Note is that cover. You know, it's interesting to see how quickly there's that Broad Booker Modern, which had an original DSM cover, and so it's. I just think it's cool to look at all this stuff and have some insight into how it all played out. Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Today we're going to look at the last segment of this video, the Audrey Hepburn covers. And of course, they're not Audrey Hepburn, but they feel inspired by her fashion sense, the hats, the makeup, the presentation. I mean, some of it's just that 60s, late 50s fashion period. But Alessio DiPaolo, also known as Alex DiPaolo, sounds like a Brazilian possibly, but he was an American at some point anyway. He was hired to do a lot of this photography. He was a fashion model photographer. And Norman Granz brought him in to do some great pictures of these young ladies. They're very fanciful covers, somewhat cheesecake, but they're not just selling sex. They're just beautiful women in fashion and makeup and hats. And they just kind of capture a side of Verve that we don't see often. A lot of these covers are a little bit more in between the crack artists. A lot of them are in the 2000 sequence, which isn't the most collected sequence today. That's not to say some of the stuff isn't fantastic, especially some of the Oscar Peterson, the George Wallington with strings is great. Lionel Hampton, the Charlie Barnett stuff. And some of the stuff is 10-inch stuff that they finally got around to reissuing in the 2000 sequence. Pastel moods actually can go for decent money. I mean, Buddy Bregman did some stuff here. That Sophisticated Ladies of Ben Webster, Norgran LP got repackaged. Some interesting stuff, and I love these covers, and they definitely seem outside of the Verve. I mean, Verve was very much the DSM look, the monochromatic colors, the simple photographs of the musicians. And these seem like quite a big departure from that. And I think a lot of times I probably skipped over some of them over the years, not even recognizing them as Verve, because so many of the other Verve covers look like Verve instantly. And I mean, I do like a lot of these records a lot. Looking at them, the Herbie Mann stuff's fantastic, Afro-Cuban. It's really a fantastic little sequence of records. Benny Goodman already shot there by Buddy DeFranco, more Buddy DeFranco, who's a great player, really underlooked. That Xavier Cugat record on Columbia was Alexis DiPaolo's first album, I believe. But I mean, I just like that series of covers, and they really feel outside of the norm from what Verve was doing. They seem to kind of come around late in the Clef sequence, actually. There's a number of Oscar Peterson records that get 3 or 4 simultaneous releases, and they all get these kind of treatments for the cover. And when I started collecting those Peterson records, I'm like, I like these covers. They're kind of different. And then I realized I had a bunch already in my collection from my other artists. And when I dug a little deeper into the 2000 sequence and even elsewhere in the 8000 sequence, I found, like I said, like 45 albums that had covers that just felt different from the normal Verve look. It fits in with the 60s, early 60s vibe nicely. The Audrey Hepburn, Cary Grant, Charade, Breakfast at Tiffany's. I mean, I'm a fan of that kind of genre of film. That kind of post-war modernity was fun. And it was just a good time. I mean, I guess my own life and history kind of correlates with it to some degree. As a kid growing up in the 70s, you would catch the reruns of the 50s and 60s films all the time on television. So, I mean, it just has a place in my heart. And, I mean, who doesn't love a beautiful woman? The one who says that is the dishonest one in the room. There's nothing offensive about admiring the beauty of a woman. It's a beautiful thing. And that's a form of repression. It's a form of control. And I won't go down that road. So anyway, it's a cool little sequence. And it shows you that Verve did have a lot of different facets to its art department. A lot of different players. A young Herman Leonard was there, who makes a career at a lot of different things. But I mean, it's just a fun time. A great look at how graphic design was evolving quickly in jazz. Verve was kind of a catalyst, but also an imitator by the time the 60s rolls around, as we saw with some of that stuff later on that looked very Blue Note-y, very prestige-like. So it's funny how little labels in the little small black neighborhoods that were making 5,000 to 10,000 records were influencing a big label like Verve, even as they went to MGM. So graphic design is an interesting part of jazz, and jazz is a really important factor in the graphic design story. So that wraps up this episode. I'll look at the Verve graphic design history. It was fun doing that once I had the entire canon in place. I know there's a few audio issues in this episode. It took a long time putting this together, and I was worried if I tried to fix it, I might set everything off, all the different segments that I was doing with. I had to overdub some stuff, and I mean, there's one part where the video doesn't match up to the vocal. I had to overdub the vocal. It was just issues I was having with my memory and my programs, and I apologize for some of that stuff. I'm not a super technically savvy person, obviously. So enjoy this episode. Enjoy your Verve, Clef, Norgran stuff. It is some of the most important stuff in the canon. I spent the last 3-4 months deeply immersed in it. The history of it, reading about it, listening to it, collecting it, finishing off what is an important, impressive body of work by Norman Granz and company. Hope you all enjoyed that, and give me your feedback. Let me know what you think about Verve and how much, maybe more, you value what that label has.